Welcome back to Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics, where we dive into the people, the challenges, and the real world stories that move global trade forward. Today's episode proudly sponsored by the Port of New Orleans, a dynamic gateway connecting global commerce to the heart of America. Our featured guest is Janine Mansour, a seasoned supply chain executive with nearly 15 years at the Port of New Orleans. Janine brings a deep understanding of international trade, liner shipping, project cargo, rail, barge, and port operations, and a short strategic focus that helps position Port of New Orleans as a key player in Gulf Coast logistics.
Originally from New Orleans, Janine now lives in Houston, right in the center of gravity for petrochemical trade and home to many of the U.S. headquarters for both container and breakbulk carriers. It's a strategic spot, and she's making the most of it as Port of New Orleans Director of Trade Development, leading efforts to grow cargo volumes and strengthen relationships across the shipping community. Her career journey is rooted in a global mindset. She studied Mandarin in high school, spent time in Taipei after graduating from Rice University, and went on to earn her MBA from Tulane. After early roles at Entergy and the World Trade Center in New Orleans, she found her way to the port world, fittingly, through a translation gig that didn't go quite as planned, but ended up launching her into a long and impactful career at the Port of New Orleans. Janine is also a mom of 3 young kids, balancing a demanding role in global logistics with life at home and doing it well with clarity, humor, and purpose. We're glad to have her on the show today to talk about trade, ports, and what it takes to build lasting partnerships in the world of global shipping.
Welcome to Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. I'm Kevin Parkerson.
And I'm Kevin Higgins. Together we bring you over 60 years in combined experience in global logistics.
In each episode, we'll dive into the latest industry trends, share practical tips, celebrate wins, and share stories from the logistics front lines, all while helping businesses optimize their logistics operations.
Let's get to it. Welcome back, Janine. Hang on a second. Where's she at? There we go.
There she is. Hi, Janine.
It wouldn't let me hit the button. That's my bad.
Okay, we took half the episode to do your introduction.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, Kevin and Kevin. So as I told you guys when we saw each other at TPM, I have been a follower of your podcast, and I just really commend you all because you all have such great conversations with your guests and really insightful. So I'm an avid listener.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much.
And that's one of the reasons why you're here. We want to continue that. So, with the introduction, the introduction was pretty lengthy, and we probably didn't leave anything out. But what did we leave out? What else can you tell our audience, our listeners, about Janine?
Let's see. A fun fact that was not mentioned. I was a competitive runner in college. And, I love when people ask me, do you still run? Because I feel like I'm always running, not for fitness, but I'm always running, whether I'm running to a sales call or running to a conference or running through the airport. I feel like I'm always running, although I'm certainly not running like I used to be.
What was your best discipline? What did you like to run?
So I did the distance events. My true passion was cross country because, the courses are much more dynamic and changing than running around a 400 meter track. But in track, I did the 1500 and the 5K.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Good for you.
Those were, seems like long ago, but good times.
Yeah, I hate running. Sorry.
It's okay.
I used to like it. I like it. I just don't do it now. So I don't hate it. So Janine, you've been with the Port of New Orleans almost 15 years.
Yes.
You're based in Houston, Texas. But maybe share a little bit more about what keeps you passionate about this type of work after, I say, all of this time, 15 years, it's half of the time, the other Kevin and I have been in the industry. So, but really after all this time, what keeps you passionate?
Yeah, it's really, so I'm in a very customer focused role, on the trade development side. We're really working with all aspects of the supply chain. So, of course, our focus being the BCO customer base, and then working very closely with ocean carriers, forwarders, railroads, barge lines, working with customers to identify solutions where we can figure out a solution collaboratively that either saves the customer time, adds efficiency, saves cost.
Mhm.
That's really what I'm most passionate about. And I think, the last 5 years, you guys have covered it on a lot of your episodes. The past 5 years have taught us all that we need more pages in the playbook. And when I say we, I'm really talking more about shippers, but
Mhm.
we're working hand in hand with shippers to try to build out their playbook for alternative solutions, and that's what really keeps me going in terms of the day to day. And then I would say, as far as just having pretty much grown up in my professional life at the port, I started when I was 25. So from when I started to where I am now, just in my personal life, I was not married, no kids. I felt like I truly have grown up in this role professionally
Yeah.
and personally. What keeps me passionate is that the work we do at the port, it's very meaningful in terms of being an economic driver for the New Orleans region. So,
Mhm.
a lot of companies that are, very focused, perhaps on profit and driving shareholder return. I'm not sure I would have the same amount of passion as I do for, having this greater context that the work we're doing is creating jobs in the community. It's growing the economy. That definitely keeps me going.
Well,
It's-
I think that's awesome. Maybe
Yeah.
KP, if we can, let's take a step back. Tell us a little bit about the Port of New Orleans, because I'm sure that, I mean, one of the things we talk about with various ports and people that we talk to is like there's different types of ports, right? So there's landlord ports or
Yep.
operating ports. So maybe just give us a quick background on the Port of New Orleans itself. What type of port are you guys, and how do you operate?
Yep, definitely. And port people love to say you've seen one port, you've seen one port, exactly
Yeah.
for what you mentioned, Kevin. So we are a multi-purpose landlord port, and we are considered a political subdivision of the state of Louisiana. So we were created by the state almost 130 years ago, but we
Wow.
don't rely on funding from the state. So we're generating all of our revenue from our operations. So we've got 4 lines of business: cargo, real estate, rail, and cruise. And so in total, we're generating about $100 million in revenue through those operations, reinvesting vast majority of that revenue into our infrastructure. And so in my role, I'm very focused on, of course, growing cargo that's moving through the port. But we take a pretty holistic approach. So I'm touching cargo, rail, and real estate in my role.
Right on. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit, I think on the intermodal side of it. Let's talk with connectivity to Class One railroads, inland markets like Memphis and Kansas City. What's next for growing that intermodal reach?
Definitely. So rail is one of our favorite things to talk about at the Port of New Orleans because we're very proud of the fact that we are the only deepwater port that's connected to all 6 of the Class 1. So we've got connectivity with the Canadian Railroad, CN and CPKC, taking us right up through the middle of the country and up into Canada. And then Norfolk Southern and CSX out to the eastern part of the country, as well as UP and BNSF on the western side. So there's other locations that have five Class 1 connections, but we're really the only deep water port connecting the ocean side to our on dock intermodal rail yard. And in 2018, the port did something that was very strategic in terms of positioning ourselves for rail growth. We took over the short line railroad, which is the New Orleans Public Belt, a Class 3 switching railroad that does all of the interchange work with those 6 Class 1s. And so we really became much more integrated, and those 6 Class 1s are also our customers now of our short line.
Hmm.
And just given our strategic location and recognizing that, with our growth goals on the container side in particular, um, the Louisiana population is not going to support the demand for imports. We're a smaller state of 4 million people. That's not naturally driving consumption where we're not a natural place for distribution centers to locate because of the population. We're really more of a strategic location because of our connectivity. And so we really look to our inland markets to support the demand side. So Memphis is our largest market, and it's very well served today by the CN with 3 day a week on dock intermodal service, and that's only 12 hours on the rail. So very quick transit. Wow. Like I said, it's long been our largest and most strategic market. We've actually done an event in Memphis for 72 years, the Port of New Orleans Night in Memphis. And it gets about 1,000 people to come out one night. Yeah, it's a really fun event. Y'all should come.
Yeah.
Maybe do a podcast from there.
Yeah. Okay. We're
But
there.
it's hosted at the Peabody, which is a great location. And some people are like, wait, why is the Port of New Orleans having an event, a night in Memphis? And it's really just because it's such an important market from an import and export standpoint. We're connected by the river as well. And then of course rail. So as we look to grow our inland reach, we've also got intermodal connectivity with Dallas and Kansas City via the CPKC. So we're looking to grow in both of those markets. Dallas is more of an existing market that's served, and then Kansas City would be a newer market that we would look to nurture and grow.
That's awesome. That's great.
Yeah,
that's a great.
We
great
definitely need to go
to.
We need to go to Memphis, and
yes.
we need to go to New Orleans. Let's go to New Orleans.
Absolutely. Let's do it both.
Yeah, there you go. So geographically, you're in between. So you're in the Gulf. You're in between two big port terminals, Houston and Mobile. How do you approach, those as collaboratively and also as competition? How do you approach both of those ports?
Yeah. So to first start with the collaborative side, I think, I guess going back to when I first started in this industry, there was a lot of talk about the Gulf being the third coast, the West Coast being the first coast, just in terms of freight volumes, the East Coast, being the second, and this whole story of the East Coast, taking away market share from the West Coast. And then the Gulf was always kind of in the background, the third coast. I remember a lot of articles even, calling the Gulf the rise of the third coast, talking about the resin boom with all of this investment in, plastics manufacturing in the Gulf, and which would fuel, a lot of the export driven growth in the Gulf. And then, Houston's population has grown so much over the years. Their imports have grown tremendously, largely just by all of the growth in the Houston area. So I would say from a collaboration standpoint, we've kind of banded together just as a region. And, we recognize that for a service string to be successful, more than likely it's going to have 3 ports on it in the Gulf. So 9 out of 10 of our weekly container services, Houston is on. We only have one service that Houston is not on, and that's a relatively newer service operated by Maersk and Hapag, and it's a Cartagena shuttle, basically. So, and Mobile, we share a lot of the same services with Mobile, more of the Trans-Pacific services. But so there's that recognition and collaboration from, we're all making investments and being able to handle larger vessels. And, there's a friendly competition for sure. And in terms of competitiveness, we really don't see ourselves competing almost as much with Houston, just because Houston is such a captive market too. The population of the greater Houston area is driving a lot of the cargo, and it's staying within Houston. A lot of the exports that are coming out of Houston also generated within, the Houston corridor. We see ourselves competing maybe more with ports to the east of us, just for that Midwest, serving the Midwest market.
That's good. That's good. Well, I know there's a big undertaking going on at the Port of New Orleans that we'll get to in a few minutes. But I want to back up just a little bit more, and I want the audience to hear a little bit more about Janine and understand maybe a little bit more what drew you to international trade, and what role did your family background play in that?
Yep. definitely. And I'm smiling because I've listened, like I said, to many of your other episodes. And it does seem to be this trend that people in our industry kind of just like happen upon it, right? There's no one who's
Yeah,
like, I'm going to
That's
work
it.
in international trade. I'm going to be a supply chain professional. Um, and for me, I guess I always had an interest just growing up in a multicultural household where my mom is from Taiwan originally. She was born in Taipei, one of 13, believe it or not.
wow.
So her family, most of her family immigrated to the U.S. when she was 9. And so she grew up in the U.S., but I've always had that, kind of international context growing up. My dad is from the Midwest, Jefferson City, Missouri, grew up
Oh,
in
wow.
upstate New York. So my mom speaks Taiwanese, but English is really more of her first language because she was so young when they immigrated. But then a lot of her families, because she's one of the younger siblings in her family, a lot of her older relatives speak Mandarin. So I always had an interest in learning Mandarin, and started studying in high school, and then at Rice took a few courses as well. And then after graduating, I realized I'm really not that good. Despite all my studies in Mandarin, I should have more to show for this. So I
Right.
was like, you know what? Let me take a gap year and moved to Taipei in 2007. Lived with some family, and that's where I really improved my accent. So Mandarin is it's a very difficult language.
Yeah.
It's
It is.
tonal, so how your inflection totally can change the meaning of words. So ma, all 4 different words, same pronunciation, different inflection. So when I got connected through a mutual friend with the chief commercial officer at the Port of New Orleans at the time in 2010, my friend said, "Oh yeah, I know Janine can speak Mandarin." And the port was looking for an interpreter to assist with a delegation from the port of Shanghai. They were visiting for a sister port agreement signing. And so I said, okay, I mean, that sounds great. I was at the World Trade Center at the time doing like a trade research type role, and jumped at the chance to get more connected with the port. And it was a total flop. I knew it was a total flop. The Port of New Orleans did not know, because I was smiling a lot. I was like being very friendly, trying to show confidence, but I had no idea how to translate like 90% of what was being said,
Oh my
because
gosh.
they were talking about air draft, water draft, dredging, various commodities. Like I barely knew it in English, much less how to say it in Mandarin. So
Right.
there was actually a very telling moment when the Port of New Orleans is the largest port for handling imported natural rubber. And I had done a little homework before, just, went to the port website because I did not know how to say natural rubber. So I had looked it up. So it was a new term for me. And I was like trying to translate it. And I said xiang jiao instead of xiang jiao, like one inflection off. And the group from Shanghai said, "Oh, bananas." And I just looked like, "Oh dear." And I was just thinking, well, I hope the port handles bananas too, because I was trying not to be too obvious about it. But I really became very fascinated in what I was hearing about the port and the impact that it has, just on the economy and being able to facilitate trade for the region. So shortly thereafter, the chief commercial officer at the time offered me a position on the marketing team. And so here I am 15 years later.
That's
Wow.
amazing. Just anybody who Mandarin is not their natural language and they study and learn Mandarin, I have such high respect for. KP and I've been fortunate enough and blessed enough to travel throughout a lot of Asian countries, and I was in I was just outside of Beijing in 2005,
Mhm.
and had a group. We took a group of girls from the orphanage. We took them out to dinner because I was on like a mission trip, and there was this one girl, and she told me her name, and it sounded like meow, but it
Mhm.
was meow meow, and so she was like telling me her name, and I'm like, oh, and so I pronounced it, and they just started rolling, and I never could, because it's just that inflection, and
Yes.
they would try to tell me, and I would
What did
say
you
it
say?
again, and I'm as Southern as you can get a lot of times. And I kept trying to pronounce it and they just kept dying laughing. Never got it right. So a lot of respect.
Definitely. And it's great now too, because, we go every year overseas to visit the carriers. So we're visiting Costco, Evergreen, Youngming, and I'm able to use Mandarin socially. I don't attempt to try to have, a business conversation in Mandarin just because there's so much jargon. Although I have learned some really cool terms like container crane. The way it's translated is dragon crane, which is pretty cool because if you think about it, a gantry crane that works container ships, I could see how you could see, like that kind of looks like a dragon. So
it does look like a dragon. That's great.
Yep.
I'm going to start calling them that.
There you go. Dragon cranes.
As a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by the Port of New Orleans, a modern gateway for global trade with direct access to river, rail, and road.
The Port of New Orleans is the only U.S. seaport served by all 6 Class 1 railroads, giving shippers a real edge when it comes to inland reach and multimodal connections.
From moving containers and breakbulk cargo to serving as a major cruise hub, the Port of New Orleans is helping shape the future of global logistics right from the heart of the Gulf.
And a big thanks to the Port of New Orleans for sponsoring this episode and for the critical role they play in keeping goods and people moving. Let's get to it. So I mentioned earlier that there's a big huge undertaking going on. Let's talk a little bit about a big, huge project. I believe it's called the Louisiana International Terminal, which is lit. And I think that's a great marketing. It's just lit in New Orleans. I think that's a great marketing slogan. But tell our audience a little bit about what's going on and what excites you most about this project.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is our LIT or LIT is our number one biggest focus from an infrastructure standpoint. So we are building a new greenfield container terminal. The driving factor behind creating new capacity is really because our current container terminal, while we have terminal capacity, we have about 1 million TEU in terminal capacity, and our throughput's about 500,000 TEU. So we're able to accommodate volume growth, but we do have a bridge, the Crescent City Connection, that vessels have to pass under before they can dock at our container terminal. And we're limited to about a 10,000 TEU size ship. And our PEX 3 service, which is operated by CMA, CGM, those vessels are right at 10,000 TEUs. We actually handled our largest vessel earlier in the year, the CMA CGM Arkansas, which was 10,034 TEUs. And the river conditions have to be very ideal for the ship to fit under. And so to be able to accommodate growth and to position our region so that we're able to handle larger ships, well into the future, we had to choose a location for a new facility downriver from the bridge. And so this has been studied for many, many years, recognizing that the bridge was going to become a limiting factor, especially on those larger trades, Trans-Pacific and transatlantic trades that, we're starting to see the vessels upsize for efficiencies. It's really a must for us to be able to grow and be a global port well into the future. So in 2021, we purchased a 1,200 acre parcel in Violet, Louisiana, downriver from the bridge. And so we are in the Army Corps permitting process, and we expect to receive the permit this summer, and then construction would begin shortly thereafter. So it's a multi-billion-dollar project. We're not doing it alone. It's a public-private partnership. So TIL, which is Terminal Investments Limited, owned by MSC, and Ports America are our 2 private sector partners that have committed $800 million jointly. And then the port and the state is supporting the remaining investment.
Wow. That's an exciting project that I know has been a long time coming and planning. So anxious to learn more and keep in touch with you. So how's the port working with to ensure community buy-in and even a sustainability component of this project?
Definitely. So we, right from the get-go with this project, we recognized, being a good community partner was going to be very important to the success, and being a genuine community partner. So we in 2020 opened an office in the community of Violet. It was an open door policy office where community members could come in, learn about the project, ask questions, learn about what job opportunities there might be. We've also formed 2 community advisory councils that are basically community members in the immediate neighborhood of Violet, and then as the broader St. Bernard Parish. And so we've had regular meetings with those 2 groups to learn, what are the issues that are most important to you, what's concerning about the project. I think naturally any project of this size, a 1,200 acre parcel is a very large parcel. And so any surrounding neighbors and just neighborhoods more broadly in the area would be wondering, okay, what kind of impacts are there going to be in terms of traffic and noise, environmental. So we really understand that, being
Yep.
open with the community, fostering dialogue. We've had almost 10 open houses with the community is very important. So we did learn through this process very quickly that traffic was one of the number one concerns of the community, is the impact of the trucks coming in and out of the terminal. And so we do have a separate but parallel project with the Department of Transportation to build a new road that would connect out of the back of the terminal, and then it would go over marshlands and tie into the interstate highway system. So it's a very large project in and of itself, because it's building several miles of new road over marsh. But it has numerous benefits, not only for the efficiency of the terminal, but really from a community standpoint. It would take all of the truck traffic off of the community streets, and be an elevated road that would tie into the interstate system. So that is a separate project, and one that's very needed for the success of the terminal.
I think that's so important. As many years as I've been around ports and terminals and hearing some of the feedback and some of the challenges that get associated with projects like this, it's really, great that you're addressing those and involving the community in the way that you are. So that's awesome.
Definitely. If you followed the New Orleans airport at all, we have a new airport that opened, and a lot of the community likes to point to the fact that the airport was open before the flyover connector off the interstate was ready, and so a lot of community and people in New Orleans have drawn the parallel. Okay, don't follow in the airport's footsteps. When you open the terminal, you need to have the road plan as well. So, but it's a really exciting project. Going back to the original question of what keeps you passionate, just recognizing that this is a project that will have impact on generations to come, because the infrastructure that ports build, we're looking at very long horizons in terms of how long that infrastructure will last. 50 years. So planning, being able to plan a greenfield site, from the ground up, rather than repurposing, redeveloping an existing site, is really exciting, because you can build it, state of the art, and build it with, the most intentionality, and incorporate all the efficiencies from the start. So it's a really exciting project.
That's awesome. I want to definitely highlight, this portion of it. I want to pivot to some of the personal leadership and family balance piece of it. And then we're at 35 minutes, then kind of pivot a little bit to the last portion of it and then wrap it up. All right, Janine. So you're a mom of 3 balancing high responsibility role, that spans multiple cities. You talked about you're based in Houston, you're working for the Port of New Orleans. What's been key to managing all that? How do you do that?
I love coffee. I drink a lot of coffee, maybe 3 cups a day, probably.
Yes.
Yes. And we're a big coffee port too. So I'm always promoting drinking coffee for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
and really support at home. So I'm fortunate where my husband has a good bit of flexibility with his job. He's a real estate attorney and works for himself. So he's got some flexibility, which is crucial to supporting when I have to travel, because travel is a good part of the job, as we know, in this profession. COVID, I think we all had a little bit of a break and got more accustomed to Teams and Zooms, but nothing really replaces, the in-person customer meetings. And then, of course, it seems like we go to more conferences these days. There's a conference for all of our key commodities. I'm just about to plan my summer trip to go to the USAPEC convention, which is the United States Poultry and Egg Export Council summer meeting, because poultry is our second largest export behind plastic resin. So definitely the support. And then fortunately, I've never been one who needed 8 hours of sleep, because with 3 kids, especially my ages are 9, 7, and 4. So they're full of energy. And my 4-year-old actually woke up at 2:30 this morning, just wanted to play and hang out. So you just got to roll with it. And I think I've adapted to not needing a lot of sleep. So I see it kind of as a very busy season of life. If we think about our life in, multiple seasons, I'm in a super busy season where I'm like right in the middle of my career and have taken on, more responsibilities and being, more of a leader at the port. And then also, very intense at home, which is trying to raise 3 kids and raise them to be kind and shield them from, some things that I don't want them to see at this young of an age. But it's definitely a lot.
Yeah. So with that said, and I can only imagine, like, my daughter will be 33 this year. KP and I, both our girls are grown. It seems like a lifetime ago, but also like yesterday when they were your kids' age. But with your job and, raising 3 kids, what is something you want to leave your kids from a legacy perspective? What, kind of example do you want to give them? What would be something that you really want to impart on them?
Definitely be passionate about what you do. And, I think then the hard work follows naturally. If you're passionate about the work that you're doing, you want to work hard naturally. It's not something you have to force yourself to do. And recently, my 7-year-old daughter, they were, learning all about the types of jobs, and it was called Community Helper Day. And so my daughter chose a port worker as her community helper job, where she had to tell everyone what a port worker does. And I have it here in front of me. And so in her view, in her 7-year-old view, she said to tell people to use the port and stuff and to go to meetings. And I thought it was really cute. It's kind of how she's seeing my job. But then
lots of meetings.
Lots of meetings. And then one of the other things she added was to make work friends. And I thought, that is true. Relationships are very important. Wow. I'm glad she's seeing that. And then she's really inflating the importance of what I do, because one of the other questions was, my helper is important because, and she wrote, if she were not here, no one in the world would have anything.
Oh my God.
So I thought,
way to go, Mom.
How sweet. But my goodness, she's really thinking that like I run the world's supply chain.
Well, you definitely have a huge role in it. That's for sure.
Yeah, awesome. So I was very touching to just see through her eyes, that, what mommy's doing is very important, and she's working hard, and, she's, viewing me as being successful. So that really touched my heart.
I love that.
No, thanks for sharing.
It should have.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Touch my heart.
Along those lines, what's your message to young women thinking about, about this field of supply chain?
Yeah, I would say, be bold, be ambitious. There's so many great examples of female leaders in our industry. I think the proverbial glass ceilings have been shattered. Certainly, from my immediate Port of New Orleans perspective, our previous CEO, Brandy Christian, was the first female CEO at the port in the port's, long history. And then succeeding her is Beth Branch. So great examples of strong female leaders in the port world. Certainly, we're seeing the same thing in the railroad world.
Mm-hmm.
Excited that CMA CGM also their just recently announced U.S. president is also a woman. So I think it's really not a novelty anymore in our industry to be a woman. And a moment that will always stick with me was when we were on an overseas trip, and this was our previous CEO, Brandy Christian, and then Amanda Coates, who's our chief commercial officer, and I were on the trip together, and we were meeting with a container carrier in their headquarters, and there were 9 other women in the room on the customer side, and then there was one man. And he paused in the meeting and he said, "I'm very sorry. I just feel a bit awkward." And we were all just kind of laughing. And he said, "I can't believe I'm the only man in this entire room of like 11
Wow.
people." And so it really made me think, yeah, it's not a novelty to be a woman in this industry anymore. I think when I first started out 15 years ago, there were certain events that I went to, and it was very noticeable to me that, like, wow, I
Yeah.
think I'm one of like 2 women in this conference. But it's great to see that that's really changed a lot, and there's really
Yeah.
no barriers anymore, based on gender or anything else.
That's
That's
awesome.
great. Yeah,
What?
I think the industry definitely has evolved as it should. So that's a
Sure.
really good sign. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
What would you say, not just to other women who are entering the industry, but what is a message that because we talk about the next generation, right? It's really something that KP and I are pretty passionate about. We've been doing this a long time. We want new people to come into the industry and to love it like we do. I mean, I truly
Mm-hmm.
love this industry. I love this work. What is something that you would say to anybody who's considering, supply chain, or, specifically transportation and logistics or anything else like that? What
Mm-hmm.
advice would you give them as they're thinking about this?
I would say try to find a great mentor. That was hugely impactful to me, and I know so many of my peers. Having a strong mentor to kind of just shepherd you through your professional life. For me, that was our CCO that hired me, Bobby Landry, and he retired with 32 years of experience at the port. He was one always pushing me, guiding me. And something that I would also pass on to the younger generation is, don't be intimidated by having, much less experience. Just jump in and, ask questions. I think a lot of times people tend to be nervous about, I don't want to ask a dumb question, or, I don't want to make myself sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, so they won't say anything. That is something my mentor Bobby always
Mm-hmm.
encouraged me to do, is like, just ask a question, even if you don't have one. Come up with one. Just be engaged. um, and I remember my very first trip with him to Asia. I was just on my first trip. I think it was maybe 2011. I had just started at the port and was in all these meetings with shippers, with carriers. And I think the first meeting I didn't say anything because I was just really taking it all in. And he told me, he said, if you don't speak, people are going to think that you're here to be a secretary and that you're not engaged. And it
Yeah.
really, I think he was, saying it a little bit jokingly, but also I took it to heart and
Yeah.
realized, yeah, you need to show that you're engaged, even if if you feel a little out of your league. Participate, ask questions, ask follow-up questions. So that really stuck with me, and that's something I would share with younger folks that are just coming into the industry.
Yeah.
That's
I
great
love that.
feedback. Yeah. So, what do you see the next chapter look like? What does it look like for the Port of New Orleans?
I see we're really, paving new paths to growth with our LIT project. It's the first greenfield container project in almost over 20 years, because the last greenfield container terminal development was really Bayport in Houston, and that
Mm-hmm.
opened in 2007. The Hugh Leatherman terminal was really a redevelopment, so we put it in a separate category of greenfields. But to be creating new capacity, um, for imports and exports and to support, vessel upsizing well into the future. So I don't know if I made it clear when I was talking about LIT, but this terminal has no size restriction. So when the pilots did the simulation on the navigational studies, they simulated a 23,000 TEU vessel. And of course, you guys would also, being in the industry a long time, would see, can we see a 23,000 TEU ship coming into the Gulf? It's probably going to be, many years ahead. But when you're building something that's, a multi-billion-dollar investment, you want to build it to last, well into the future. So that's what our future looks like, is, creating 2 million TEUs of new capacity with no limits on vessel size, and, really growing as a gateway to the Midwest.
That's exciting. That's really exciting, the way you laid it out there. So that's awesome. Being in the industry as long as we've had, that's exciting.
Well, and just thinking about New Orleans specifically, KP, this, like when I was at Walmart, Janine, in the latter years of my role, 2000s, I had somebody kept coming to me and saying, "Hey, we need to look at, going into Houston, taking containers into Houston, because we're West Coast, East Coast." And I'm like, no, we're not going to go to Houston, not going to go to Houston. And it was one of those things, like, I eat my words on that a lot, because when I left that role, he convinced my predecessor. He's like, "We need to go to Houston." They're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to Houston." And now we have all this, now we're looking at containerized volume coming into a lot of Gulf ports. And so it's really exciting to me, as somebody who said we shouldn't do it.
Definitely.
To see all this happen.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, Janine, this has been great. I love your story in the industry, love your leadership, and love what the Port of New Orleans is doing. So that's a wrap on today's episode of Kev Talks Real World Global Logistics. A big thank you to Janine for sharing her insights, her experience, and perspective on the evolving role of ports, trade development, and what it really takes to keep cargo moving. A big thank you to our sponsor, the Port of New Orleans, for supporting this conversation and for the work they're continuing to do to connect global trade to the Gulf and beyond. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. Until next time, keep it real and keep it global.
Thanks, Janine.
Thank you, guys.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. If today's discussion inspired you, don't forget to follow, subscribe, rate, and share our podcast.
Remember, every great journey in logistics starts with a single step forward. Let's continue working together to transform the industry.